disparities within the islands. And I am supposed to have a map somewhere up. If we can go to the map, which I don't see, but at some stage it's going to come. The idea was to mention to you that when we take the most recent data from Eurostat on the GDP, we see that there is a major drop on regions and in particular on islands. So we have almost 8 regions changing eligibility, and you can see it in the map now. This, right, okay, it's going to go back at some stage. There you go. You can see that you have 8 islands, really, I mean 8 regions that change eligibility, mostly in the south of Europe, and obviously it demonstrates that cohesion policy is needed and that the economic development in regions is not happening. There is issues that still need to be worked on, and in particular in island regions. So this is why we're here. This is why CPMR is very, very active in actually pushing forward our weight as islands to make sure that cohesion policy is strong enough and it's strongly financially supported for us to be able to catch up in terms of economic development with the rest of Europe. I'm going to leave it to that. I think we have a number of changes in our speakers, and we have one addition in our speakers while we want to keep it nice, smooth, and short. Mr. GALIATSATOS, the regional governor of Ionian Island, will be our first speaker, and then we will give the floor to Rino Piscitello, who is representing, he's in charge of interinstitutional relationships in the cabinet of the Vice President of Sicily, because Mr. Armao couldn't make it here. I will then give the floor to Nick, who is our Director on Cohesion Policy in CPMR. And last but not least, we're going to have a discussion with Lefteris Stavropoulos, who is a DG Regio officer, and he's going to speak to us about the territorial cohesion and about definitely the cohesion policy as such. So without any further ado, and please, if we can try to be as short as possible and as, you know, importantly pushing for ideas, but in a short way. So, President, the floor is yours for the introductory remarks.
Thank you very much for giving us the floor. So, I'm going to talk about 7 points, and on conclusion, I will be very brief. This first point has to do with the fact that we welcome the progress made by the European Parliament with regards to the rules and cohesion policy as of 2020 and onwards. What we need right now is for the regions to address our member states, and negotiations need to be accelerated so that all programs can be implemented in January 2021. The second point has to do with the fact that we support the position of the European Parliament asking for a stronger budget in the European Union for the period after 2020, and our requests have to do with the fact that cohesion policy resources need to be maintained at the level of budget as it's applicable right now, and at the same time we want to increase the level of financing of DG Regio through the Connecting Europe facility. Third point, it has to do with territorial collaboration. We, as a region, because we know that the region of the Ionian Island is a direct stakeholder and beneficiary in the Greece-Italy interconnection program, we support the position of the European Parliament, the majority of member states, to preserve maritime borders as eligible for financing in the Interreg cross-border programs. However, we are worried by the methodology of distribution of resources, because the proposal of the Commission limits resources focusing on that. We know that we cannot put sanctions on specific regions because cross-border collaboration on maritime borders is very important and very effective compared to collaboration between the mainland regions. Fourth point, we warmly support the position of the European Parliament to increase the co-financing percentages for all categories of the region. And we would like to add that we need all insular regions to benefit from this maximum percentage of financing. I'm talking about 85%. Fifth point, it has to do with the categorization of the European Union funds. The Commission prefers changing the 2014-2020 system and having the resource of cohesion policy being collected at national level depending on the GDP of every member state. And this should be achieved at the regional level in order to better reflect the various territorial circumstances within a specific member state. I believe that we all agree on that. Sixth point, for regions such as ourselves, for example, the Ionian Islands region, including the various clusters of islands, cohesion policy should be as flexible and simple as possible in order to meet our special needs with regards to employment, circular economy, interconnection, biodiversity protection, and anything else that has to do with insularity, as has been described. The seventh and last point has to do with the corporate relation and management. The recently adopted EU position reduces the multi-level regulations and adjustments and renders the drafting of the partnership agreement as non-compulsory. The Council position does not consider the regional aspect, the regions as critical partners, and this position of the member states is, to our point of view, a great cause of unease and concern. And we know that this and our vision of the cohesion policy should be at the heart of this endeavor. And the conclusion is that we're now at the early stages of the procedure. We still have many uncertainties with regards to drafting the new cohesion policy after 2020 and negotiations for the budget of the European Union and the European Commission. Our Commission and our members need to stay alert in order for us to continue supporting the interests of insular regions. Thank you for your attention.
This is what I call a robust, short and very to the point intervention. Thank you very much, President. So exactly the messages that CPMR Islands Commission has been pushing for many years, the flexibility, the strong partnership agreement, the budget for cohesion policy, the Interreg maritime on cross-border. So all those issues that we have been debating over the years, and you can find, of course, in your policy papers and final declaration. Can I turn to Rino then now and ask you to make your short introduction in the same fashion like the President before?
Sì, io sostituisco il vicepresidente della regione siciliana che è stato trattenuto da impegni.
I'm here in replacement of the Vice President who couldn't be here today, Mr. Gaetano Armaono. I would like to highlight a very important issue that touches upon the cohesion policy, meaning the insularity. Because the disadvantages that arise from insularity need to be acknowledged in the cohesion policy. And I'm talking about Article 157.4. But this article provides for a special treatment, let's say, for insular areas and disadvantaged areas. I would also like to mention also the article that talks about cohesion policy. Article 174 needs to be interpreted in the right way. We need to read it in the way that says that cohesion policy needs to focus on disadvantaged areas, particularly insular areas. And when we talk about the budget, the cohesion policy, etc., it needs to be clear, and we need to remember that if we don't pay attention to that, then we breach Article 174. Therefore, European Commission needs to pay more attention to insular areas compared to other areas. The EU treaty is the basis of EU law. Cohesion policy is the nucleus of all EU policies, and of course it reflects the European principles, starting from the effort to bridge differences and discrepancies between various regions. Of course, we need to support the position of regional areas and insular areas. Of course, this pertains particularly to us. We need to put pressure in order to make sure that this will happen. Today, we acknowledge the importance of these elements, but not in practice, in fact. The situation is as follows. There are geographical barriers. Everybody acknowledges the difficulties faced by the residents of islands, and this requires for compensatory measures. Compensation is the term proposed by the region of Sicily, and it was adopted in our final declaration today. So we need to compensate for insularity as a permanent disadvantage, and it is the only way to go forward, to change the current situation and put more pressure. Now I would like to give 3 examples that allows us to be optimistic. Thank God we have the intra-region team, the SEARICA. So, after the proposal by Sicily and Sardinia, we drafted a document that asks from the European Union to introduce measures that would compensate for territorial discontinuity. And in order to compensate for the problem of distance between the islands and the mainland. Also, Sicily, Corsica, Sardinia, and Balearic Islands prepared a letter with clear requests that need to be submitted to the European Union, and they pertain to insularity. Therefore, we need to be very decisive in our activities, in our movement. We need to demand to be listened by the European Commission, by the Committee of Regions, by the European Parliament and the Member States. We need to ask for compensatory measures that would enhance cohesion policy for both big and small European islands. The future of the cohesion policy, in our opinion, needs to put at the center, at the heart of the policy, the issue of insularity. For us, insularity is a synonym of proudness, of history, and of our culture. We are Europeans, we come from an island, and in this spirit, we need to claim our rights.
To all policies, cohesion policy, the intergroup in the Committee of the Regions where Sicily is chairing, and the periphericity index, which would be something really to be added in the cohesion policy debate. Thank you very much for this intervention. Nick, up to you.
Thank you very much, Eleni. Thank you for inviting me for this important meeting, of course. And it's always a pleasure to talk in front of the Islands Commission of CPMR. I have this impossible task of presenting two technical papers in a very short amount of time, so I'll stick to the brief. I've been briefed very intensively by my colleague Giuseppe about sticking to the main point, so I'll try to do that. I guess my mission is really to present in a nutshell a couple of issues linked to the renewal of the EU territorial agenda and why it matters for islands, and I'll say a few words about cohesion policy negotiations and where we are and the next steps. Just very quickly, the territorial agenda, for those of you who do not know what it is many things. It's a political and territorial framework to implement and support the Europe 2020 strategy. It puts in place the principle of territorial cohesion. It provides territorial coordination of EU policies, but also it provides a raison d'être for cohesion policy. That's quite theoretical, unfortunately. That's what exists currently, and the renewal of the territorial agenda is an opportunity for us, and I'll come back to that. In fact, it is going to be renewed in the second half of next year under the German presidency, so it gives us a little bit of time at CPMR and its Islands Commission to develop messages around that time frame. Very quickly, where does it fit? You can see right in the middle of that slide that the territorial agenda, in theory, again, as I mentioned earlier, is supposed to act in the middle of the MFF, the EU urban agenda, and to act as a sort of in-between strategy, in between the Sustainable Europe 2030 strategy, which is due to replace the Europe 2020 strategy, and the various policies with a territorial relevance. So I'll just leave it there because I'm running out of time. Why does it matter? So I'm going to try and explain why it matters, and I'll start with the opportunities. The future territorial agenda, which is going to be renewed next year, as I've just said, will provide a framework for all EU policies with a territorial impact or relevance. Post-2020, of course, to follow the next programming cycle, but beyond that as well. It will influence the next future cohesion policy, the next one, the one that will start in 2021, particularly around the governance and the tools, but also the philosophy of the cohesion policy after that. So my message is very clear. If we are serious about the CPMR being at the forefront of cohesion policy, then we need to start thinking about it right now, because the discussions about the post-2027 cohesion policy start in the next few months, if you like. It's also about the role of regions and the territorial dimension of EU policies, and I'll come back to that. And it covers essentially areas of competence dealt with at regional or local level, and this is why we need to do something about it. Now, why does it matter? Just focusing a little bit on the risks. First of all, the long-term place of cohesion policy, it was not, I mean, that's a personal view, but I'm guessing I can say it's also a CPMR official view that the cohesion policy is not the preferred policy of this current commission. From the very start, when Mr. Juncker came in, it was seen, I remember the mission letter that was sent to Corina Crețu. It was, the wording was about how can we use cohesion policy to support other things, and how could we make it more efficient, even before the policy had already started implementing. So our mission, I suppose, is to make sure that cohesion policy remains EU investment policy for all regions, that the principle of shared management, so shared management programs remain, that you can't do everything with a central pot of money managed at EU level. And we need to address very significant issues in the future about eligibility, which regions are eligible for the various categories of regions, which categories of regions, which focus, which indicators you use to calculate the allocation methodology, perhaps I was mentioned in this morning. Those are questions that will be on the table, and we need to have an answer for those. Secondly, the big risk, and I think Eleni mentioned it this morning, is that over the past few years there's been a stronger focus on urban and cities. Now, again, there are urban areas and cities and islands, of course, and that's completely fine. I'm not against urban, but what I'm saying is that the focus of DG Regio, and that's a personal view, has perhaps been perhaps a little bit too much on urban rather than taking a more holistic view of territorial development. And you can see that in the way that the funds are being targeted. There's earmarking of structural funds for sustainable urban development. At the moment it's 5%. The Commission proposes to raise it to 6%, I believe, for the next period. And the European Parliament is proposing 10%. So, you know, that's a trend. You have the European Urban Initiative, and you also have a discussion that goes on about linking the territorial agenda better with the urban agenda. Again, to give you an example. And finally, why does it matter? Well, in the first discussion papers that are circulating to review the territorial agenda, there is no mention of territorial discontinuity, there's no mention of Article 174, no mention of islands, no mention of territory-specific geographical handicaps so far. The last two words of that slide matter, because that is what we are trying to address, and I think we can do that. So, in a nutshell, and this is essentially what you have in the technical notes that was prepared by Giuseppe and Gael, what we could ask in that context are the bullet points on that slide. Let's start with the beginning. Territorial cohesion should be a priority, and we need to remind the next Commission that it certainly should be the case, and they need to take into account the diversity of territories. Secondly, and it was mentioned a few times throughout the day, but we need to work on the recognition of islands as territorial units. We missed a trick in 2016 when there was a review of the typology of territories. There will be another opportunity to do so, but certainly we need to work on the recognition of islands as territorial units. We need to work on the quality of territorial diagnostics as well. I won't dwell on that too much, I don't have much time. Within cohesion policy, there are a few options that we can put on the table around co-financing rate, around thematic concentration, the tools, the regional state aid, and so on and so forth. And I was really interested to hear the various presentations from the Commission representative. It seems that every DG does something for the islands, or a lot of them do, DG Move, DG Energy, DG Regio, DG Mare, but there is no integrated approach. There is nothing that links all these initiatives together. And that's, again, a very clear message that I believe, if you agree, and with the support of Giuseppe and others, that we could develop something like that. It's very important. Just very quickly, because I'm running out of time, I wanted to give you a flavor of where we are on cohesion policy. This is exactly how not to do a PowerPoint slide, because there's way too much information and the text is way too small. But I'm hoping you'll be able to make it out. It's basically a time frame of what has happened until now, from the time when the Commission proposed its package in May this year. All you need to know really is that in November last year, the European Parliament adopted its position on the next EU budget. So they were very quick in adopting that. The Council is, on the EU budget side, it's still early days. Actually, there hasn't been very much going on, to be honest. And even when we will get an agreement is up to anyone's guess, and that's also linked to Brexit, but I won't dwell on that at all, because that's dangerous territory these days. But what's of real interest is what happens next. On a negotiating, talking about negotiations, what you need to know is that the Council has reached agreement on some parts of the proposals, including on the partnership agreement, and I'll come back to that. And the Parliament will have a complete agreement on all of the various sectoral legislation, normally next week in the plenary. I think there is supposed to be an agreement on all aspects. So in other words, the European Parliament will have its position next week. The Council is slowly getting there, but they're a little bit slower than the European Parliament so far. We're expecting a complete agreement within the member states in June. That's what the Romanian presidency has announced. And then we're ready for trilogues, so to speak. So the Council and the Parliament start negotiating. They try to negotiate already but they've stopped because the European Parliament elections are imminent. And then I've put a big question mark on around December 2020, agreement on the post-2020 EU budget. That's what everybody's talking about, but that will depend on other things. And also, let's not forget that a lot of the sensitive aspects of cohesion policy, all the budgetary issues, but also things like thematic concentration, they are dealt with by the same people who deal with the MFF, the EU budget, which complicate things, but I won't dwell on that. Very quickly, I've got 2 more slides. Successes. So we've done a lot of lobbying work with the Islands Commission as well. Of course, the big success, I suppose, is around the Interreg, on the European Parliament side, and this is mentioned by the governor earlier. We're very happy that the European Parliament is pushing to reinstate maritime cross-border cooperation program, and that's something. The member states, they're getting there, but they haven't reached a formal approval, but I think they will get there, which is great. They're also agreeing to raise the budget, which is great. Out of the 67 amendments that we propose on the various bits and pieces of legislation, cohesion policy, I think 284 amendments from the European Parliament were inspired by CPMR amendment, which is very good. Successes around the recognition of partnership and multi-level governance, both on the CPR and the ESF+. And other aspects which I won't dwell on, because I want to focus a little bit on the concerns which were already raised to a large extent by the governor already, around the ETC, so the Interreg. I will show you a map what I mean about the allocation methodology, because we don't like the way that the Commission calculated the allocation for maritime cross-border cooperation, so I will illustrate what the governor said a minute ago. We're also very concerned about the lack of consideration of the regional authorities in the partnership agreement, and the fact that a number of member states, according to the Council agreement, will not have to do a partnership agreement. And I think that includes Sweden and Denmark, for example, because the allocation is quite low. So you fall under a certain threshold, which means that you would not have, under the Council's proposal, let's see what the Parliament does with that, you would not have to do a partnership agreement. So that's potentially a bad thing for the islands as well. And there's also some question marks about thematic concentration. What will happen is anyone's guess. I just wanted to finish off with this allocation methodology question that was raised by the governor earlier. This is the way that the Commission calculated the way that the maritime, so component 2B of Interreg, which regions are taken into account to calculate the member states' allocation. So the orange regions are the ones that are taken into account to calculate the money for member states to do maritime cooperation, and the blue ones are the ones that are left aside. And we actually did a lot of lobbying with the help of Alfred Sant, an MEP. So we used the good cooperation that we have in it to ask a very difficult question to the Commission, to ask, how did you come up with this? And the answer was, partially because we have used a 150-kilometer limit, which we actually, back in May, we thought was not part of the legislative package. So in other words, it seems that they have reintroduced it, but by the back door. Exactly. The good news is that, as I mentioned earlier, the Parliament and the Council seem to be agreeing on the fact that this will not work and we need to find a way to bring back maritime cross-border cooperation. So this might change. But again, this is up for negotiation. And my last slide is about what we do next. The fight for cohesion continues, with your help, of course. We will do some work to continue to influence the member states' position, particularly around thematic concentration, because that's a very big question. We're planning another meeting in the next few months with the PERM reps in Brussels. We, of course, will mobilize the new European Parliament MEPs, including the Ionia MEPs, of course, to make them aware of what we do and to ask them for support, depending on where we are on the negotiations. We expect a lot of number crunching after the summer break on the MFF. So we will be using the next General Assembly CPMR to react to potential cuts, because I'm expecting some cuts on the cohesion policy budget. And to finish off on the territorial agenda, we're hoping to develop some messages to be adopted by the next AGM CPMR in October as well in Sicily. And I just wanted to finish off on that, and thank you for your attention.
I hope you heard very carefully all this information and it all came into your brains, because it's very important. We are doing a lot of work on this particular subject, on cohesion policy. We've been quite fundamental as an organization on cohesion and very well recognized by the institutions. Proudly said so. So thanks, Nick, for that. And without any further ado, I think we're going to our last speaker, who is a very good friend and an island friend within DG Regio. So Lefteris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eleni. Good afternoon from my side. Being the last speaker before the dinner is not a very good thing. That means that everybody is anticipating to get more relaxed and in a more happy atmosphere. So I will try to address some of the comments made by the previous speakers, and for the rest, I'm at your disposal over dinner with a glass of wine. We can discuss, and I can provide some more clarifications why the Commission chose this or the other option. Starting from a comment made by Nicolas that cohesion policy is not very important for the Commission and that President Juncker probably undermined cohesion policy, I would like to stress that this is not true. If you look at the numbers of the MFF, the most, let's say, the biggest part of the budget is dedicated to the cohesion policy. And the second largest part is the agricultural policy, another policy from which the islands are also benefiting. So we have to take this under perspective in a very constrained budgetary, let's say, environment. We have a Brexit that will definitely bring cuts in the European budget. We have member states that are calling for renationalization of the European budget, and in this very difficult economic and political environment, the most, let's say, influential budgets for the islands have been preserved, and they are the biggest of the EU. Going now to cohesion policy, we have to bear in mind that there was a shift, a paradigm shift, even from the last and the current programming period. Cohesion policy is no longer a distribution policy. It's an investment policy. And this is something that we have to keep in mind when we discuss about what the cohesion policy should support or not. The other paradigm shift that was made even from the current period, but it will be more strengthened in the new programming period, is the fact that we do not consider the islands or the mountains as the bad students in the class, or those lagging behind, or those in need. We understand the challenges, we understand the problems, but we see the potential. And the potential was underlined also here by other speakers today, and we saw how much you can do in recycling, in biodiversity, in tourism, in renewable energy. So because the budget is not unlimited, what we want to do is to give incentives to all the regions and of course to the islands to try and to go along this new path of the new economy, which comes with all these trends and paradigms that we heard today. The other thing is that we don't want to earmark money for this area or for the other. We earmark money for European strategies, for European goals that were set by our political masters, the head of the member states. That's why we have earmarked a big amount of money for climate change and adaptation, or for environment, because we have all committed to Agenda 2030 and to Sustainable Development Goals. The only, let's say, difference that we have made, and the only, let's say, opt-outs to this rule was for the outermost regions, something that I think that your Commission was fostering and recognizes the political reasons behind this. And when it comes to the cities, it was not to support the cities, but it was to support a new paradigm shift. What we want to achieve is that we want to push the cities to take more responsibility and to go along a new path of organizing themselves, in the sense that we want them to come up with strategies that are integrated, holistic. We want them to leave the path of coming with one project here and one project there approach. So via giving them this 5 or 6% of a budget, which is not very much if you consider the amount of population living in the cities and how much, let's say, they contribute to the European economy, we want them to push them along the line of thinking how I can plan in an integrated way a strategy bottom-up in a participatory approach with my citizens, not just the municipal council and the mayor who knows everything and they have the answers for everything. The other thing now that we want to say is that within the European Commission there is a collective approach to the issues of the islands. Perhaps it's not always the best coordinated, but in the last years we have established an inter-service group that is dealing with territorial cohesion, and this is the group that we will be using in the coming months and years to intensify the coordination about the issues regarding the islands, the mountains, the sparsely populated areas. We are now considering, and we will be soon embarking on a new staff working document to put together in a let's say, friendly way, presented to you what are the measures that every DG and the policies and the programs that we have to support islands, mountains, sparsely populated areas with tangible examples. And also we would like to see what in the future all these emerging trends from, let's say, robotics, artificial intelligence, will bring to these areas and to come with some forward thinking, because I think this is an opportunity for you now with the change of the Commission and the change of the Parliament. These new bodies that will come in place after the May election will have also to rethink the priorities. And here you have also some margins to influence the agenda of the future. Plus, what Nicolas said via the territorial agenda, which is, we have to remember, not a Commission initiative. Is an intergovernmental process as the urban agenda. It starts with the member states. It's the member states that they are leading there, and the Commission we try to influence. We're just, let's say, one member around the table without the decisive voice. We don't even have a vote there. It's the member states that they take the decision. So I highly advise you to go to speak to your member states. And the same, of course, goes for all the legislative package. If, for example, the Greek representative in the Council or the Greek minister do not raise the issue of insularity, then don't expect the issue of insularity to become into the legislation. The same goes for the Italian representative, the Maltese, or the Cypriot representative. Commission is an honest broker, or at least we try to be an honest broker in a very difficult environment, because you have to understand that one member state is pulling things to one direction and the other towards the other direction. But we need from you, from the member states, to have an active role. You as local authorities, as regional authorities, to push your member states to have this active role in the Council. Otherwise, we expect to create a compromise, but for this compromise we need decisive people. One new animal in the room which we have not touched upon is the European semester and the country-specific recommendations. I don't know how aware you are about this new development, but now the programs will be also driven by what we have every year in the semester reports and the country-specific recommendations. So this is something that I would advise you to read and to consult. This year's reports came out just a few days before. There you can see already the policy mix that the European funds will have to serve. So with the structural funds of the future, when you will reading the report for Denmark or for Greece or for Italy, there you will see to which direction we will go. Now, for the proposal of the Commission about the regional policy. The official position of DG Regio is that we wanted to create an enabling environment where everything that you probably wish to do can be done. And we think that this we have achieved, because even if you have, let's say, a policy menu of only 5 policy objectives, policy objective 1, for example, can finance for you recycling, biodiversity, all the things that you need. Or if you don't like this menu, at the end, there is a dedicated policy objective, which is Europe closer to citizens, from where, apart from supporting integrated strategies in cities, we have a second stream, which is supporting integrated strategies to all the other territories of Europe, islands, mountains, partially populated areas. And there is not even a conditionality, because I don't know, again, if you are aware, all the other thematic objectives, you need to abide to certain conditionalities. So probably I will close here and leave room for discussion and questions.
Thanks very much, Lefteri. So appreciate it. The Did You Read Your perspective? From my side, I will say that it's good to have inter-service group for islands within the Commission, and that's something we asked for. But we would like also to be part of it as much as possible, because as regions, we are unfortunately not necessarily involved in these discussions. And it's interesting for us as much as possible. We discussed with the Director General, Mr. Ristori, if we can create a task force of some sort with all the Director Generals and with CPMR there, so that we can have an informal way of putting forward some of our concerns in terms of consultation, but in terms of implementation as well of all these policies. For us, it's important not to just be at the table. It's important to be at the table effectively, because we do have proposals and we do have suggestions on all those issues you mentioned, and we are very much in favor of having this territorial agenda, but not necessarily the way it is like for this kind of the member states discussions, because we are very much in favor of actually having a discussion as a community, as a European Union. That's why we ask for a white paper in our final declaration, where the issues on insularity or peripherality or challenges and opportunities, because we're not just the handicaps, we also are those that we can make proposals in terms of renewable energies that we mentioned in the former. So we do have positive elements to propose, and we would like to be able to be addressed and heard before the legislation is going on or before the budget is being agreed. Okay, now the floor is yours. Short interventions, please, questions or statements, but in short. Go. You come up, yes.
Yes. So, and of course. So, on that. Thank you very much. So, firstly, I want to say thank you very much to Giuseppe in the first place, and Eleni and the President and others for allowing me to be here today. Obviously, I come from an Irish island, and right now I'm speaking with my Irish Islands hat on. So, in light of some of the discussion that has taken place today, if I can just show you here that our view, this T-shirt here in Gaelic says Tá éire ar costa her hua cléire, which in English is that Ireland is an island off the coast of Cape Clear. So here obviously we have Ireland and here we have Cape Clear Island, and that is in fact our view from the island of the world, and maybe we could take that into account. So anyway, again, thank you very much. My island is not a member of, or is not in a region that is a member of CPMR. I will be talking to Eleni and Giuseppe and the President, no doubt, and we'll see if we can remedy that situation, that I'll get to bring some other gift next year. So anyway, I have two T-shirts here, one of which I'm going to give to Eleni and the other to the President of CPMR Islands Commission. And thank you very much for letting me have the minute to say this, but I just thought it was important to make that point. Evcharisto. So, Mr. President, for you. And Eleni.
Thanks so much.
Okay. And the keeper of the microphone.
Thank you very much.
Moderating this debate. Is there anybody who wants to say something apart offering me T-shirts? It's also acceptable.
Some additional elements. First of all, the partnership agreements that the Council has proposed that in some cases where a member state takes only a small portion of the budget, or they only have, let's say, up to 3 programs, that they should not be in place, doesn't mean that we will not be asking from this member state to submit a strategy. The strategy will be there reflected in the operational programs that they will submit. So there is a strategy. Then regarding the negotiations, we have initiated a parallel, let's say, procedure. So although the negotiations in the Council are taking place and in the Parliament, and we have a trilogues to agree on the legislative package, we have already started knocking on the doors of the member states in order to put them in motion to start reflecting on their future strategies. And for that reason, we have launched already events. So we are visiting the capitals of the member states during March and April in order to kick off this informal dialogue with the member states about their future programs. So this is an opportunity for you, but also you have to be quite active and act quickly to be part of this process with your member state. And for that, in the future regulation, we have proposed the principle of partnership. That means that you cannot be excluded from this dialogue. So the regions do have an important role, and we will be monitoring this. The same goes with the associations of municipalities. And I would advise you that you have also island municipalities, councils in your countries, because these could be then identified as a potential partner when it comes to this new, let's say, principle that you have to be taken on board your proposals. Then for the thematic flexibility and for the co-financing rates. We had this in the current programming period, but as you will hear tomorrow, because I will present an analysis and a study that we did with a survey that we have conducted all the managing authorities that were having islands or mountains, etc., not many used these flexibilities. And the reason was because the menu was so broad that they could do more or less every investment that they wanted without using the flexibility. And when it comes to the increased co-financing rates, that would have meant that there would be less investment at the end. Because if you have a project of 100 euros and European Union compensates you for 50 euros, the other 50 has to come from the member state. So for you at the end, you have increased investment, while if it is only 85 and the member state puts only 15, so the end result is less investment, public investment in your area. And many regions didn't want this to happen. That's why they opted, even if they could go for a higher co-financing rates, like South Aegean, it comes to my mind because it's an insular region, they opted for the 50-50 in order to get more national investment in this region. But in the coming programming period, if this is something that you want, we only measure the co-financing rate on a national level. So your government can allow you to have an increased co-financing for one program, for one region, or a set of regions, because we will be measuring the co-financing overall on a national level. So you can find arrangements within your country in a flexible way to accommodate these needs if there are there.
Okay, you had your chance, now no other debate. You're going to grasp, I think, a glass of wine and follow his invitation to talk to him over the reception this evening. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you to the interpreters for today. I know we have tired you, and you've done an excellent work. An applause. Okay, thanks very much.